I will just present. I will try to stop for questions, but if you have any questions or comments, feel free to interrupt. Okay, so async work. Yeah, so I guess like what is sort of the problem underlying all of this talk about async communication, how to work, how to be more productive? And the way I see it is that we sort of have this problem of focus versus coordination. And by what I mean by that is that focus is sort of that deep work where value is created, and coordination is sort of teamwork where the value is directed. One metaphor that I like to use is like, focus kind of creates these strings, and coordination is like tying those strings together to create like a rope or a cloth or something like that. And I think the key thing there is that we need both of them. So we can't just say, oh, everybody just focus and never coordinate. You're going to get a lot of problems that way. And we can't also just say, well, like, let's not worry about focus. Let's just always stay coordinated. And I think sometimes I've seen managers take, one side of that equation. And in both cases, you get problems. So without focus, we're unproductive. I think everybody knows what that's like. And without coordination, we're counterproductive. So we might be doing we might be doing things well, but they're not necessarily the right things. And so we sort of have tension both ways. And that's fine. Like maybe that's not a problem to have both of these, but the problem is that attention is singular, right? So the psychology research shows quite well that we don't really multitask. We can't really parallel process two things intensely. So all we're doing is context switching when we switch from one task to another. And like with computers, context switching is quite slow. You have to like unload the problem that you have in your head, load up the next one. But with humans, it's even worse because it's kind of lossy, right? So while a computer can kind of unload and load perfectly, just slowly, with humans, we're forgetting things. So the more distracted we are, actually, the longer work takes. And even like there's a safety factor to it in some cases. It's not just that it takes longer, but you're doing the wrong things. So if we want to focus on problems and we want to coordinate with people, like our attention is kind of always being tugged back and forth. And that's why it's so hard to get this right. So just given that, async communication has nothing to do with that. I guess the solution would be that we kind of need a balance of these two and over time and in different situations. So kind of like music, how music is kind of like balancing across time with shifting shapes and different pieces. I kind of see that as the answer to the focus coordination trade-off. So in different times, like different parts of a project, you're going to need more coordination at some parts and more focus in other parts. For example, the beginning, we have the think phase. Everyone's coordinating, we're having meetings, right? And then sort of in the middle, we have the build phase where probably we need to be focusing more. And then at the end, we want to tie those threads together. The same thing applies across teams though, right? So just like we have different instruments in a band, you have one is like the bass player and one is like the singer or the guitar player. You kind of have some teams that are customer facing that might be coordinating a lot more. And you have sort of internal teams that are focusing more. And then same with like individual roles, right? So managers are kind of more responsible for coordinating and engineers are more responsible for focusing. And sometimes I've seen that there's problems when you have managers who want to like have their focus time when the team really needs coordination. Like the team's in chaos, but like the manager just wants to like code. I've seen that a few times. That can lead to problems. You can also have problems when engineers who are responsible for delivering these threads, like they just want to coordinate all the time, right? And they're not actually delivering what they're responsible for. Of course, it's fluid, right? This is all a spectrum, but just some like simple examples. And yeah, different times call for different measures. So even with all these sort of simple rules, like at any time, we can just ask, like, do we need focus or do we need coordination at this time? So that's kind of like the underlying premise of this whole thing, the underlying problem, the underlying maybe solution, and then all the async stuff comes after that. Does that make sense, or any questions or any comments?
Makes sense.
Cool. So I will move forward. Then, so then we have this sort of like focus problem where we know that too many meetings kills focus. And I think Paul Graham wrote it the best, and everybody knows that blog post hopefully called maker schedule manager schedule, where basically says like, if you're a programmer, you need probably 2 to 3 to 4 hours of uninterrupted time to really get the problem in your head and to solve it the right way. And as soon as someone distracts you, as soon as you have a meeting, that problem like kind of like falls to the floor and you have to start over again. So in my experience, you can get a lot of work done, but it's maybe not the best work. It's not the right amount of work if you don't have that focus time. So then with that article, everybody pushed towards async communication, and like async communication is going to save us. But given that we still have all these channels and we have all these different ways of communicating, and just because all this communication is on Slack doesn't mean that you're going to be focused. And actually, we're kind of confused because I feel like we don't really have like a framework or a way to think about this to achieve that balance that we're striving for. Yeah, and so this is just another kind of going in the same direction. Like, team wants to cut meetings, like 0 meetings, and then you end up with the same problem of like everyone did their work, but it's like, oh damn, I thought you were doing X, but I did Y, and now we had this like collision. And I've seen that quite a bit. So yeah, just like we can't push meetings into Slack. We sort of need a framework, and we see these coordination issues rear their head. We're not just saved by doing everything offline. Okay, so then how does this sort of tie into Synchrony? So just to start there, I want to define what does Synchrony mean? What does it mean if something is synchronous? What is asynchronous? And we can start from there. The way I kind of see it is how many people need to be in one place at one time to use a communication channel. So there's 3 factors there. One is how many people. The other one is like what place. So place can mean like, is it in Slack or is it in a meeting room, right? It's like how tight is the space of the thing. And I can explain that later. And the other one is like how tight in time do you need to be? Do you need to be in one period of time, like in one meeting, or can you see something many times over years? So it's kind of like the tightness of something in space and time. I really like that metaphor. So asynchronous, so more synchronous channels are super tight. Like you really have to like squeeze in a limited time and limited space and lots of people into this very small channel. And that's what makes it expensive. So like space time is literally like shifting from twist to like, let you send messages through it. So yeah, 2 simple examples there is like the in-person meeting, everyone needs to be in one place at one time. Whereas if you stream the meeting, like if you put it over Zoom, you can watch from anywhere. So you can kind of feel space opening up there, And then if you record the meeting, then you can watch from any time. So you can see like the time dimension is kind of opening up. And so that's like really saving of costs. So given that definition, we can kind of classify our channels on this spectrum of synchronous to asynchronous. So on one end, you have the meeting room, then you have Zoom, Slack. Yeah, channels versus DMs. I think that's a quite interesting thing, right? So channels have more people. So they're better for coordination. They're kind of like, there's more people there, it's more expensive. Whereas DMs are a little more streamlined. The channel's a little more open. It's kind of a fuzzy point, actually. Curious if you have any ideas on that. And then at the bottom, sort of, you have Jira and Slide and stuff like that. So given that definition, how do we solve our problem? How do we tie it into what we were doing before? And it's sort of that we need, so coordination is achieved through communication, right? We have to share messages in order to coordinate, right? So in order to achieve that balance that we want before, we need to communicate across the spectrum of synchronous channels, balancing focus and coordination over time. So the way we communicate actually is how we achieve that balance from the first part. Yeah, maybe sounds simple enough, but like maybe we can get into more details. If anyone has any questions or any comments, feel free.
Not yet.
Cool. So now we have like these 2 concepts, right? And so we can kind of like create this one consistent picture, right? So on one side we have coordination, on the other side we have focus. So if you want to coordinate, like we're kind of pushing towards the top of the spectrum. And if we want to focus, we're pushing down towards the bottom of the spectrum. And on top of that, so I'm trying to kind of figure out how to keep this simple, but also just like sharing the ideas that I find are useful, is that synchrony is also kind of a measure of information throughput. So throughput is basically how much information can you pass per second, right? And these synchronous channels can handle a lot of information per second. Even something like body language, right? It's something that you don't get over Slight. And even stuff like reactions and Giphy, you don't get over Confluence or email. And this is all like adding information per second. And so these synchronous channels, they can actually handle a lot of information. And that's probably what makes them so useful for coordination. And just like not even coordination, but you know, that feeling like you're in sync with someone, like feeling part of a team, feeling human, not just that we're sort of like workers that pass messages around and do tasks and knock things off queues. So one useful metaphor there is like hot versus cold. So hot channels are faster, but they're also ephemeral. So if anyone who's tried to catch up on Slack after being on vacation for a few weeks, like you know that like it's really hard to capture value in Slack. So it's really nice to have a cold channel where things are more evergreen. They're a little bit more solid, so they're kind of like frozen. Hot channels are more personal. So, you know, I think there was some with the crisis, like people were firing people over like a recorded message on Zoom. That's like super async, like super nice for focus for the person who's doing the firing, but for the person who's getting fired, you don't have any feedback. You don't have that synchronous throughput that would make you feel more human. But it's also more certain, the hot channels. So I know I can tap Rob on the shoulder and get an answer from him with a synchronous channel. With an asynchronous channel, I don't know when he's going to respond, right? So that's sort of the value trade-off there. Then with cold channels, as I said, more evergreen, but it's also more mechanical. So I really like this concept of like being workers who just like, you get a message, you do a task, you pop something off the queue, you get another message. And if we push too much on the async side, it's going to be more mechanical, which could be good for focus, but maybe it's not good for feeling part of a team. The important thing there also is that since they're solid and it's not so ephemeral, it's easier to reference and it's more searchable. So I would propose that search is not bad on Slack because of Slack search. It's because Slack is inherently hard to search. We're not using these little keywords. We're not referencing things all the time. So it's really nice to have things that are searchable and referenceable in these cold channels. So now putting all those onto the same picture again, right? We have sort of like the hot channels on top and the cold channels on the bottom. And these are both playing into sort of synchronous and asynchronous. And so with that, like each channel has like sort of a capacity for each energy, how much energy it can take, has a threshold. And when it exceeds its threshold, it kind of blows up. Like if you can just think of like a Slack thread that just has too many messages on it, like it can't handle the amount of information needed to coordinate there. Or even like a meeting, like a Zoom meeting. With Zoom, you can't talk at the same time basically, but in a real meeting you can. In a real meeting, sometimes even there's too much energy and you can feel it. You can literally feel that this like meeting can't handle this. So we kind of need to then escalate or de-escalate. By escalating, we're sort of getting more coordination. We're sort of allowing more information to flow. And by de-escalating, we're sort of like solidifying things. So it's like, if you have a meeting that's too stressful, you might say, hey, why don't we just write about this? Sort of compress the ideas. And then we can sort of like heat it back up again. I like that metaphor quite a lot. So given that, so it's kind of like one concept there. Basically, this idea is that we need to be able to escalate and de-escalate quite freely. Something that I've seen that prevents that is when a team has gaps. So when a team has gaps in their communication channels, you'll get like a pileup of energy and messages on either side. So what we can do is like a little exercise. So what I would ask is, given like a team with their set of communication channels, we could ask like, what would that team be like? Like, what would it be like to be on that team? What problems in communication would they encounter? So let's say that, for example, Slack and email were like killed, right? And this team only had meetings via Zoom or in person, or Jira and Slight. Does anybody have any thoughts?
Can you ask the question again, Cam?
Yeah, basically like, what would it be like to be on this team? Like what problems would you see that this team would run into, or what solutions? Like, if we didn't have Slack, if we just imagined a world without Slack, how would sort of problems arise, or how would we sort of coordinate on things?
Yeah, probably like the two extremes, right? It's either like too impersonal, or it's like too high energy when you're like always doing everything in meetings,
Yes.
or like in meetings.
It would probably go in between. Either I do something and write it up afterwards, or I write something up, then there is a confusion, and then the next step of escalation would always be jumping on a meeting and talking about it. So you would probably go constantly back and forth.
Lots of back and forth, yeah, in the Jira threads or somewhere, and then having to meet, yeah.
Adrian was posting something in the channel. I think he's in the train. He said people get lazy because the Zoom call is too engaging, and that, I guess, leads to less communication. For example, too high a bar for small discussions. And then because those discussions don't start, they also can't escalate.
Yeah.
And yeah, sorry, I still can't talk.
Beautiful. Yeah. No.
I think another one that I kind of caught my attention when you said it is that in like meeting and Zoom calls, you don't have a lot of certainty, right? That you have in writing, and if only the most official, fleshed out information makes it into that state of certainty that you have, if it's in Jira or if it's in like a slide, you don't conserve any of the quick ideas, right? It's just in a meeting and then it fades away. So
so what I actually meant, I think maybe I didn't say it clearly. The more synchronous, actually you get more certainty. So that's why, for example, business deals are usually done in a meeting room and not.
The way I understood it, maybe it's my German. If it's in writing, it's certain. If it's in a meeting, you just talk about it, and then after the meeting, everyone is like, "No, that's not what we said." So that's why I always like getting stuff in writing.
I know what you mean. So basically, like there is some factor where asynchronous communication helps coordination quite a lot, and so there's maybe a detail there that I'm not capturing. But there definitely is that. But you know what I mean also with the, like in a meeting, usually we say, hey, let's sync, let's get this thing certain, and then we sort of freeze it.
Absolutely, because you get all the cues. You can see if someone is joking or not, for example, right?
Yeah. So I have more examples, so we can go through those as well. So what about this team? Let's say that we had the async, fanatic that's like, all right, no more meetings. What would this team be like? This is supposed to be the future, right? Like no meetings, everything async. Yeah, exactly. Adrian said it well. And I think that's also a problem in the previous one. So if you didn't have Jira or Slide, Adrian said kilometer-long Slack threads, hell. Same would apply to Jira or Slide in this case. Like these would get overloaded with the information that they need to carry, and they're just not made for that.
Yeah, I think in this case also the problem is that people that don't feel good with so much async communication, those threads would suddenly lose their voice because there would be no place where they can express themselves. I think it would also be like completely take out the human elements. Like everything would be very, I think remote or detached from the communication. So it would be like you either are fine typing a lot, and then you might like be happy in that organization, or not, and then you would suffer because there would be no way to get your voice out in a way.
Yeah, beautiful. So yeah, maybe there are people that's a concept I didn't put here, but there's sort of like on every team, there's like a concentrator and there's like a coordinator, right? People have different levels of extroversion, right? So maybe for some teams, that's perfect. We just only have people who focus and they want to be on this team. But for people who like that human touch, they might feel alienated.
I think actually what we're seeing right now with exactly this example is that if there is a bigger group of people, then for example, on morning stand-up, it's very much easier to do a quick catch-up verbally, whereas if everybody has to write down everything and we have to read through everything, coordination is much harder.
Yeah, right. The quickness, for sure. Okay, then I think we have one more team. Basically, yeah, no Slide, no Jira, only messages back and forth.
So I think at that stage you would, in case of developers, quite literally don't get anything done. You would know exactly what other people want to be working on, or what they could be working on, or what they're not working on, what you are working on, or what you want to be working on, but no one actually does anything, like gets anything done. Or if it's like less extreme, at least you're far from peak productivity.
I think I would probably argue that things get done, but no one knows why they get done, and there's just totally, like, I think it just ends up being a chaos of everyone doing whatever they want, and then just like you don't get anything done in terms of actual outcome. But I think everyone is super busy because they just feel empowered to like just do stuff because there's no certain background or context for what they do.
I think it's going to be a lot of some short-term productivity. So things will be done. We started, early on Monday. You said let's work on this bug, and I think it's going to happen. But it's going to be hard to plan the future. We're going to have no documentation, so it's going to be hard to understand what happened in the past. So basically, coordination, which makes sense according to this graph, it's going to be difficult. I think we can create value, but it's going to be hard to have the same direction and understand on the long term. It's going to be pretty detrimental.
You end up digging through email threads for documents that you like had set up in the past, and so like James said, like all that documentation just ends up being like buried in PDFs, like in old email threads, or like, God forbid, Slack DMs.
Which will be hard for any new joiners as well, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Access to history, not with Slack or email.
And maybe just out of interest, who actually you can use the emoji reactions, who actually ever worked in a setup like this?
Me, I worked in a setup without the middle one when I started 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think that was quite normal.
Exactly.
But,
email was the thing. And you were receiving normally 100 email a day, easy.
So there's literally developers who are using Slack and email as their issue tracking tool. That's crazy.
Yeah, so the thing that I would add to this one is that you have a lot of repetitive questions. And I think it's not like, do we have a team like this or not? We're all falling into these things like at different times, right? We don't use even the channels we have the right way. So I think always, like, whenever we didn't document something, it was like, wait, who said that? Like, what did we say about this last time that we talked about it? And you have to look through Slack to find that answer. And it's not easily referenceable because Slack has this huge, fire hose being created every day. Okay, I can't leave a reaction because I'm presenting, but if everyone presented, we can ask, so what are the gaps on our teams? I guess we sort of have business and growth and product, so I guess it's a little different there. But yeah, if anyone has any ideas of where maybe we have a channel, but we're not using it the right way, or we're just completely missing something, and what would we predict, or what have we seen that are problems with that?
I do think that we're having a lot of good conversations on Slack that are not, so to say, persistent.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, don't know if there's a good way, but there is conversation on Slack that would be worth saving for the future, for sure.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind immediately is just with the pandemic, right? We don't have in-person meetings anymore. So we're missing that human, synchronous, like those sort of, the richness of having conversation over a beer versus having a beer over Zoom, right?
Yeah.
The other one that I would say, I think it's pretty normal, but in bigger teams, you'd see that Jira is used a lot more, right? Larger scale teams, For example, I think today we had a fix for some Slack log that I kind of worked on, and Adrian was like, "What didn't Cam do something with that?" Right? Usually Jira is kind of where those questions can be answered of like, okay, there's this ticket, this was the status, this is all the context for there. I think probably now we use mostly Slack
Yeah, totally.
or Confluence. So we have sort of a little gap there of like mostly coordinating on per task events on Slack or Confluence.
Yeah, I think the problem with Jira is like, I mean, it's not a tool in which we work a lot, and basically if you add a comment in a Jira ticket, you don't know when someone is going to see it. When if you write something in Slack, you expect to have a reaction, and basically, yeah, I don't know. And also I think we just don't like Jira. But I think for me, like the thing that prevents me the most from really using it as a communication tool is I don't think we actually communicate well inside Jira and that comment system, and then you receive an email notification and all this. Like it's not great, I would say, and it's slow for sure. And we always try to be quick, right? If you need an answer, you can rarely wait 24 hours.
Yeah, I think what I've seen is usually what that means is you're sort of pinging people on Slack, and then their focus kind of gets pulled. In other teams, even small teams, I mean, especially in a big company, what I've seen is that actually like an issue comes out. There's so many of these issues flying around, and to know the status of what things are, you can either ask people over Slack or have a stand up, or you could look at the tickets. So it kind of helps with focus in that sense, based on this model, right? Yeah, so I've seen usually comment threads can be quite longer in Jira, but they're not these immediate things, and then that opens Slack up for more immediate communication. If you have this sort of intermediate async channel, right? Not Confluence, not Slack, but yeah.
I also have the feeling, but I could be wrong, is that Jira, for us using Jira better, it would require more coordination and basically more Jan or I, like preparing more things, preparing a ticket and all this. And I think we know we are pretty bad at that. We had a time where, I mean, we're still creating this ticket, but often also like then developers create the ticket, but then we don't really go through them. So I think it's a bit of a, I don't know, if there would be a way that it doesn't centralize or require that much coordination, that would be good. I mean, I don't think we put a lot of effort into finding a way because we just don't really like Jira, but I could see a value of not pinging everyone in real time in Slack as well. And typically, I mean, someone like me, I don't check Slack a lot because it is very distracting, but usually when people ping me, they expect an answer quick, and then it's a bit, you create a bit this gap between expectations and and need fulfillment.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a problem at this point. Like it could, like I think as the team grows and as the number of tasks grows, that we can't keep it in our heads or communicate them very efficiently. We might see that we need more of that mid change. Okay, sorry to alienate Marash. Yeah, so I can wrap up. I don't know how we are on time.
Yeah, because I think we have class
over.
for us. We have a meeting now.
Okay, so thanks everyone.
Thanks a lot. It was great. Thanks for improvising this. It was actually very useful. I think we should follow up on this, though. I think we all agree that there is some improvement to be done. It's probably not the highest emergency, but like in general, it's worth to revisit this discussion and see how we could bring things a bit further.
I think it's a great framework. Like it's not the concept of balance that, you know, we're always moving, and it's never, you know, you never get to the perfect spot. It's always a process of improvement or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Okay.
All right.
See you all later then.
Yeah, let's go. Ciao, ciao.
Really cool. Bye.